The night my husband handed me a bouquet of white roses at his parents' anniversary dinner, I knew exactly where they came from. Same florist on Birchwood Avenue. Same cream cardstock with the gold leaf border. Same looping handwriting on the note, except the note in my hands that evening read to my forever, and the receipt I had photographed in his jacket pocket 22 months earlier read for Melissa, always. I smiled at him across the candlelit table. I kissed his cheek. I said they were beautiful. And somewhere in my chest, quiet and certain as a clock, I thought, 5 more hours. My name is Cassie Morgan. I'm 36 years old. And for 2 years, 3 months, and 11 days, I knew something my husband believed with absolute confidence that I did not know. He thought he was careful. He thought he was smart. He thought the woman he'd been married to for 8 years was too distracted, too trusting, too absorbed in her own small world to notice the seams coming apart in his. He was wrong about all of it. But I let him be wrong. Every single day. Because I had learned something a long time before that night that most people don't figure out until it's too late. The most powerful move in any room is the one nobody sees you making. If you're already feeling this one, go ahead and hit that like button and subscribe, and drop a comment letting me know where in the world you're watching from. I love knowing who's out there. Now let me take you back to the beginning. I grew up in Harlow County, a stretch of central Virginia where the farms run close to the road and everybody knows your family's business before you do. My mother, Patricia, was a bookkeeper for 3 different small businesses in town. She worked at a scarred wooden desk in the corner of our kitchen and she taught me 2 things before I was 10 years old. First, numbers don't lie. People lie. Numbers just hold the evidence. Second, if you ever find yourself in a room where you're being underestimated, stay quiet and take notes. Your moment will come. I took those lessons into a degree in accounting, then a master's in forensic finance. For 12 years I worked as a financial investigator, the kind of person companies call when they suspect someone internal is stealing from them. I followed paper trails. I read balance sheets the way other people read novels. I found the hidden accounts, the double-entry tricks, the shell companies set up in a cousin's name 3 states over. I was good at it. More than good. When I married Daniel Morgan at 28, I thought I was done using those skills professionally. I was going to consult part-time from home, we'd said. Build a life. Maybe a family. I loved him. I want to be honest about that because it matters. I genuinely loved the man I thought he was, and for the first 4 years, I had no reason to think otherwise. Daniel was a senior project manager at a civil engineering firm called Parson Croft. Solid salary, good reputation, easy charm. His family, his parents, Roger and Diane, his older sister Trish, her husband Craig, they were the kind of people who looked comfortable in photographs. Well-dressed, well-spoken, quick to laugh at a dinner table. They had a lake house in the Shenandoah Valley and opinions about wine and a tight, seamless way of closing ranks that I never quite cracked in 8 years of trying. I wasn't what Diane had pictured for her son. She'd never said it directly, Diane never said anything directly, but I felt it in the particular way she smiled at my shoes and asked about my parents' line of work. She was warm to my face and precise in her distance when it counted. Trish followed her mother's lead, which meant I was tolerated, occasionally included, never quite absorbed into the inner fold. I told myself it didn't matter. Daniel loved me. That was enough. The first crack appeared on a Tuesday in January, 2 years and 3 months ago. I was working at the kitchen table on a client file when Daniel's phone buzzed face up beside his coffee cup. He was in the shower. I wasn't looking for anything. I wasn't suspicious. I glanced at it the way anyone would glance at a phone buzzing 6 inches from their hand. The preview read, "Last night was everything. Miss you already." The name above it was M. Solis. I looked at it for about 4 seconds. I put down my pen. I picked up his phone with both hands and I read what I wasn't supposed to read, not all of it, just enough. Enough to understand the shape of what I was looking at. Then I set the phone back exactly as it was, face up, same angle, same distance from the cup. I picked up my pen. I went back to my client file. Daniel came out of the shower 12 minutes later, kissed the top of my head, checked his phone, said nothing, poured himself more coffee. He had no idea. That night, lying in the dark while he slept, I made a decision that would define the next 2 years of my life. I was not going to react. I was not going to confront. I was not going to cry in a bathroom or call my best friend or demand answers in the driveway at midnight. I was going to do what my mother taught me and what 12 years of financial investigation had refined into something almost surgical. I was going to take notes. Melissa Solis was 29 years old, a junior landscape designer at an architecture firm 2 blocks from Parson Croft. Daniel had met her at a joint project kickoff in November. I found her LinkedIn profile within 30 minutes of Daniel falling asleep, then her Instagram, then a public Facebook profile she'd kept partially open. She was pretty in the way people look when they're not trying, dark hair, easy smile, the kind of person who posts photos of hiking trails and farmers market produce. I didn't hate her. I thought I would, but I didn't. She didn't know I existed in the way that mattered. She knew Daniel had a wife the way people know about weather in a city they've never visited. It was information that didn't change her daily life. Daniel was the architect of this. Daniel was who I needed to focus on. Over the following weeks I made myself useful and invisible in equal measure. I stayed warm at dinner. I asked about his projects. I suggested we try the new Italian place on the weekend, and I laughed at the right moments, and I touched his arm the way wives do when they're comfortable and content. And quietly, methodically, I began doing what I had been trained to do. The first thing I noticed was the credit card. Not our joint card, that one was normal. It was the Barclays Visa. I found the paper statement for tucked inside a folded gym bag in the back of his closet. Opened in his name only, 14 months before I found the text. The balance wasn't large enough to alarm anyone on its own. But the merchant names told a story: restaurants I'd never been to, a hotel in Charlottesville charged on a Thursday when he'd told me he had a site visit in Roanoke, a jewelry boutique on King Street in Alexandria. I photographed every line. I filed it. I said nothing. By March I had found 3 accounts I hadn't known existed. A savings account at a credit union 40 minutes from our house. A brokerage account at a firm I recognized from my investigative work. It was one commonly used for assets people weren't planning to disclose. And a joint account. Not joint with me. Joint with a name I didn't recognize at first, until I ran the address and found it was registered to a townhouse in Fairfax County that Daniel had apparently been co-signing the lease on since the previous August. I sat with that information for 3 days before I could look at it clearly. He wasn't just having an affair. He was building a second life. Parallel and fully furnished, with a different woman and a lease and a shared bank account and presumably a version of himself I had never met. And he had been doing it, funding it, maintaining it, lying to sustain it, while coming home to our house, sleeping in our bed, and letting me believe the only thing wrong in our marriage was that his mother still hadn't fully warmed to me. I called my mother on a Sunday morning when Daniel was golfing. I stood in the backyard with my coffee and I told her everything in a single breath. She was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "How much has he moved?" Not "Are you okay?" Not "I'm so sorry, baby." She knew me well enough to know what I actually needed in that moment. "About $40,000 that I can trace," I said. "Probably more I haven't found yet." Another pause. "Then, you're going to need a lawyer before you say a word to anyone." "I already have an appointment," I told her. "Thursday afternoon." She exhaled. "That's my girl." Her name was Renata Voss. She ran a boutique family law practice out of a converted Victorian on Morrison Street, and she came recommended by a colleague from my investigative days who called her, without irony, the most dangerous person in any room she walked into. She was 52, silver-haired, with reading glasses she only wore when she wanted you to think she was relaxed, and she listened to everything I had brought, the statements, the photographs, the account numbers, the lease, the timeline, without interrupting once. When I finished, she set her glasses on the desk. "You've done about 60% of my job for me," she said. "I need to know if I should confront him now," I told her. She shook her head slowly. "Not yet. Right now he doesn't know you know. That is the most valuable thing you have. Once you say a word, that clock starts and it doesn't stop. We use the time first." "How long?" She looked at her calendar, then at me. "Long enough to find the rest of the money. Long enough to file correctly. Long enough that when this surfaces, it surfaces in a room of your choosing, on a day of your choosing, with documentation he can't argue with." She folded her hands. "Can you do that? Live with it? Stay quiet while we work?" I thought about the bouquet receipts and the Charlottesville hotel and the white oak crib I had always imagined we might build a life around. I thought about Diane Morgan's polite, measuring smile and the way Trish had once said to me at Christmas, very gently, that Daniel had always needed someone who understood his world. "Yes," I said. "I can do that." For the next 22 months, I lived 2 lives with the same composure Daniel thought he had exclusive rights to. On the surface, the good wife. I attended Roger and Diane's dinner parties. I brought the right wine. I asked Craig about his renovation project and Trish about the girls' school play, and I sat beside Daniel at the table and smiled when he put his arm around me for photographs. I cooked and I cleaned and I laughed and I performed every gesture of a woman who did not know. Underneath, I worked. Every document Renata requested, I provided. Every asset she needed traced, I traced. I kept a locked folder on an encrypted drive that grew thicker every month. Bank records. Wire transfers. The lease renewal. A second hotel, this one in Fredericksburg. A car payment, a car I had never seen, registered to Melissa Solis but paid from the joint account Daniel shared with her, funded by transfers from his Barclays card, funded in turn by a bonus he had told me was smaller than it actually was. By November of the second year, Renata had everything she needed. The filing was ready. The petition was drafted. The forensic summary of marital assets, the real ones, including the $78,000 in hidden and redirected funds, was documented, sourced, and signed. She had the paperwork organized into one manila envelope. We just needed the right room. It came to me in October, when Diane called to discuss the anniversary dinner. 35 years. She wanted it at the Alderton Club, the private dining room on the second floor, the one they used for events that were meant to impress. 60 guests. The whole family. A photographer. A slideshow Roger didn't know about. It was, Diane said, going to be the most beautiful evening. I said it sounded wonderful. I offered to handle the centerpiece flowers. She paused, that brief, practiced pause she always used before accepting something from me without quite acknowledging it. "That would be lovely, Cassie. Something classic. Nothing too modern." "Of course," I said. When I hung up, I sat for a moment in the kitchen with the phone in my lap. 60 people. The full family. A room Daniel's parents had chosen specifically because they wanted their son seen in it, surrounded by everything they'd built together, the reputation, the friendships, the narrative of a solid, successful, well-ordered life. I called Renata. "I think I have the room," I said. She was quiet for a moment. Then, "Tell me the date." "December 14th. I'll have the envelope ready December 12th. "You're certain you want to do it this way?" I thought about something my mother had said the first time I called her from that backyard. She'd said it at the end of the conversation, just before she hung up, almost to herself more than to me. She'd said, "The truth doesn't need an audience. But sometimes the audience needs the truth." "I'm certain," I told Renata. The 2 weeks before the dinner were the strangest of my life. Daniel was attentive in the way men are sometimes attentive when guilt has no outlet. He brought home takeout on a Thursday, suggested a movie Saturday, asked about my work with a focus I hadn't seen in months. I wondered sometimes if some part of him sensed that something had shifted in the air between us. If he felt, without knowing what to call it, the particular quality of a wife who has stopped hoping and started finishing. I didn't give him anything to read. I was warm, easy, unchanged on the surface. I thanked him for the takeout. I laughed at the movie. I said goodnight and I slept beside him, and in the morning I drove to Renata's office and I held the envelope in both hands for a long moment before putting it in my bag. It was not heavy. It weighed maybe half a pound. But it contained 22 months of quiet, disciplined, methodical work. It contained the full accounting of what Daniel had built in the dark while I smiled at his mother's dinner table. It contained the truth, documented, sourced, signed, and ready. I put it in my bag. I drove home. I pressed my mother's second lesson so deep into my chest I could feel it in my spine. Stay quiet. Take notes. Your moment will come. December 14th arrived cold and clear, the kind of December night that makes everything look more formal than it is. I wore the deep green dress Daniel had once said was his favorite, a detail that cost me nothing and would cost him everything. I did my hair the way Diane liked it. I wore the pearl earrings that had been a birthday gift from Roger and Diane 3 years earlier. I looked, when I checked the mirror at the door, exactly like the daughter-in-law they had always seen, composed, appropriate, quietly grateful to be included. The envelope was in my bag. Daniel held the car door open for me in the driveway. He was in a gray suit, freshly pressed, looking like a man with nothing to hide. He'd brought the white roses, the ones from Birchwood Avenue, the ones I recognized by their cardstock, and he pressed them into my hands as I got in, and smiled that easy, practiced smile. "You look beautiful," he said. "Thank you," I said. "So do the flowers." He didn't catch it. He never did. That was always the thing about Daniel, he heard what he expected to hear and everything else slid past him clean. We drove to the Alderton Club through the dark and the cold, the roses on my lap, the envelope in my bag, 22 months of silence settling into something that felt, for the first time, very much like its own kind of power. I was ready. I had been ready for a long time. I was just waiting for the right room. And the right room was 5 minutes away. The Alderton Club's private dining room on the second floor holds 60 people comfortably and makes them feel like 80. Low ceilings, dark walnut paneling, candlelight that turns everyone's face warm and slightly golden. The kind of room designed to make the people inside it feel they have earned the right to be there. Roger and Diane had reserved it for exactly that reason. We arrived at 6:40. The room was already half full. I recognized faces in the way you recognize the geography of a place you've visited so many times you've stopped seeing it clearly: Roger's college friends near the bar, the couples from the club, Diane's book group in matching silk blouses, a handful of Daniel's colleagues from Parsoncroft arranged near the window with their wives. Trish and Craig were already seated, their daughters in velvet dresses, Craig with a glass of bourbon at a height that suggested it wasn't his first. Diane intercepted us at the door. She was in ivory, she always wore ivory for occasions she considered hers, and she kissed Daniel's cheek and then mine in the particular sequence that told you everything about the household's internal ranking. She looked at my dress and said it was a beautiful color, which was the closest she came to a compliment without fully committing to one. "The flowers look wonderful," she added, glancing at the centerpieces I had arranged that afternoon. White ranunculus, dusty miller, thin branches of winterberry. Classic. Nothing too modern. "I'm glad you like them," I said. She moved on. She always moved on. Daniel put his hand on the small of my back as we crossed the room and I let him, because for the next hour and 40 minutes, nothing had happened yet. In another 90 minutes he would not be touching me. In another 90 minutes the particular geography of this room would be rearranged in a way that none of these 60 people would forget. But for now, we were still a couple at a dinner party. I played it that way. I said hello to Roger, who squeezed both my hands and told me I looked lovely. I congratulated him on 35 years. He laughed and said he was the lucky one. he meant it. Roger was the only Morgan I'd ever truly liked, because Roger was the only one who never made me feel I was being assessed. Dinner was served at 7:30. Beef tenderloin, roasted root vegetables, a burgundy that Craig made a small performance of approving. I ate and I listened and I contributed exactly the right amount to the conversations around me, enough to be present, not enough to be memorable. I was, for one last evening, exactly the woman this room expected me to be. The envelope was in my bag on the chair beside me. I didn't look at it. I didn't need to. Renata had prepared 2 copies. One for Daniel. One that she would file simultaneously. She and I had coordinated the timing that morning. At 8:15, while I was at this dinner, her paralegal would be submitting the divorce petition to the circuit court clerk's office. By the time Daniel read the first copy, the second would already be in the system. There would be no window to argue, no gap to maneuver in, no version of events he could race to get ahead of. The documentation would be a matter of public record before the dessert course. At 8:10, Roger stood and tapped his glass. The room quieted in the way rooms do when the person standing is clearly loved. Genuine quiet, not obligatory. Roger was that kind of man, the kind people actually wanted to hear from. He thanked everyone for coming. He talked about 35 years with the measured warmth of someone who has thought carefully about what he actually wants to say. He looked at Diane when he said the word partner and meant it in the old, solid sense. He said the things people say at anniversaries, but he said them without the performance quality that usually hollows them out. I found myself moved in a way I hadn't anticipated, and I held that feeling carefully because it was real and what was coming was also real and they were both allowed to exist at the same time. Then Diane stood. Of course she stood, this was Diane's event as much as Roger's, and she had a speech prepared with the polish of something workshopped over several evenings. She thanked their friends. She thanked their children. She looked at Daniel with a mother-specific pride and said that watching him build his life had been one of the great joys of theirs. Daniel smiled. His hand found mine under the table and squeezed it once. I squeezed back. Then Diane said she wanted to add one more thing, that 35 years of marriage had taught her that the foundation of a good life was honesty. That without honesty, she said, you were building on sand. The room nodded and mm'd in the affirming way of people who have had enough wine to find aphorisms genuinely moving. Honesty, she said again, looking out at the table. That is everything. I looked at my bag. Diane sat down to applause. The room settled back into itself, warm and liquid and satisfied. A few people refilled their glasses. Someone laughed at something near the far end. The photographer moved around the edge of the room looking for candid moments. And then Daniel stood up. I hadn't expected this. He hadn't mentioned a speech. But he had a glass in his hand and the particular energy of a man who has been moved by his parents and wants the room to know it. And 60 people looked at him with the same reflexive warmth they'd shown his father. He said his parents had shown him what it looked like to choose someone, day after day, without conditions. He said that was the thing most people missed, that love wasn't a feeling, it was a decision you made every morning. He said he was grateful to have learned that in this family. He looked at me when he said it. 60 people followed his gaze to me. I held eye contact with my husband and I did not look away and I did not let a single thing I knew reach my face. I had been practicing that particular expression for 22 months and I had it exactly right. I smiled at him. The kind of smile a wife gives her husband when he says the right thing in public. He smiled back. He was confident. He was comfortable. He had absolutely no idea. He sat down. The applause rose and fell. Someone said here, here. I reached under my chair and lifted my bag onto my lap. If you're hooked on this story, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss an upload. Your support means everything and helps me bring you more emotional stories like this one. The moment I chose was not dramatic in its setup. That was deliberate. I didn't wait for a tense silence or a pointed comment or a natural break in the evening that announced itself as a threshold. I simply set my bag on the table, reached inside, and placed the envelope beside my water glass. Daniel looked at it the way you look at something unfamiliar in a familiar place, a half-second of neutral confusion before the brain catches up. He saw the return address on the upper left corner. Voss Family Law, Morrison Street. He saw his own name typed on the front. He looked at me. My face gave him nothing. Cassie, his voice was low, the voice people use when they're trying to contain something before it spills. What is this? I kept my voice the same level as his. Conversational. Unhurried. Something I need you to read. Now? His jaw had tightened in the specific way it always did when he felt cornered, a slight forward pull at the hinge that I had catalogued without meaning to over 8 years of marriage. Whenever you're ready, I said. Roger was watching us from 3 seats down. Diane, beside him, had caught the change in register and turned her attention our way with the practiced sensitivity of a woman who had spent decades monitoring the emotional weather of every room she occupied. Daniel picked up the envelope. I watched his hands. His fingers pressed into the flap and he withdrew the first pages, the cover letter from Renata, then the petition, then the first of the supporting exhibits. His eyes moved across the lines the way eyes move when they are reading but the brain is refusing to process. Then they stopped. He had reached the asset summary. The real one. I watched the color change in his face, not dramatically, not the way it happens in films, but the slow, specific draining that starts at the temples and moves inward when a person understands, all at once, the full shape of what they are looking at. He reached the line item for the Barclays account. He reached the brokerage. He reached the Fairfax County lease. His hands had gone still. Diane said his name. Daniel. The way mothers say a name when they already know the answer to the question they haven't asked yet. He looked up at me. His voice, when it came, was barely above a breath. How long? It wasn't a question. It was a man calculating the distance between the version of events he'd been living in and the one currently sitting in his hands. I let the silence hold for a moment. Around us the table had stilled, not everyone, not all at once, but the way a room stills when something true is happening and the air itself seems to recognize it. 2 years, I said. 3 months. 11 days. He stared at me. He opened his mouth once and closed it. The envelope sat in his hands like a verdict, which is exactly what it was. I want to be precise about what I did not do in that moment. I did not raise my voice. I did not cry. I did not make a speech about what he had put me through or what I had swallowed every morning for 22 months or what it had cost me to sit beside him at this table tonight and listen to him talk about love as a daily decision. None of that was necessary. The documentation said everything that needed saying. The only thing left for me to add was the one sentence I had been carrying since October, since Diane's phone call, since I understood what room this was going to be. I had the words ready. 10 of them. I set them down quietly, without flourish, the way you set down something that has been a long time coming. I knew the whole time. And I documented all of it. 12 words, not 10. But they landed exactly the way I needed them to. The table was very quiet. Roger set down his glass. The sound of it touching the tablecloth was the loudest thing in the room. Trish had both hands in her lap and was looking at Craig with an expression I couldn't read. The colleagues from Parsoncroft near the window had stopped their conversation. The photographer had lowered his camera. Daniel looked down at the papers. He looked up at me. He said my name once, Cassie, and there was something in it, not anger, not even desperation, something older than both of those, the specific register of a person who has just realized that the ground they were standing on was not solid and never had been, that they had simply been allowed to believe it was. I picked up my bag. I pushed back my chair. I stood. Diane said, Cassie, please. I looked at her directly for the first time all evening. She had gone very still. Her ivory dress. Her pearl earrings. All of it perfectly composed except for her hands, which were pressed flat on the table in front of her as though she needed the surface to stay upright. "I'm sorry this happened at your dinner," I told her. "I mean that genuinely. But I need you to know that the filing is already with the court. There's nothing to pause. There's nothing to talk through tonight. It's done." Roger said quietly, "How much did he take?" 78,000, I said. "Over 26 months. It's all in the exhibits." Roger turned to look at his son. Daniel was still holding the papers. He hadn't moved. I said goodnight to Roger. I nodded to Trish. I did not look at Daniel again. I walked down the length of that candlelit table through 60 people who were watching me with the particular silence of witnesses, past the bar and the ivory tablecloths and the Winterberry centerpieces, and I pushed through the door at the end of the room and I walked down the stairs and out of the Alderton Club into the cold December air. I stood on the sidewalk for a moment. The night was still and clear and very cold and it smelled like wood smoke from somewhere down the block. I could hear, faintly, the sound of the city going about itself, a car passing, a door closing, someone laughing 2 streets over in the uncomplicated way of people having an ordinary evening. I breathed in. I breathed out. I called a car. My phone buzzed before the car arrived. "Renata." I answered. "It's filed," she said. "Timestamped 8/17. How did it go?" "It went," I said. A pause. Then, in the dry tone she reserved for moments that deserved it, "Good." I sat in the back of the car with the white roses on my lap because I had carried them in without thinking and carried them out the same way, and I looked at them and I thought about Birchwood Avenue and cream cardstock and the handwriting that had started all of this, and somewhere around the 3rd stoplight I decided to keep them. Not as a wound. Not as a reminder of what had been done to me. But because they were beautiful and they were real and they had nothing to do with him anymore. They were just roses. And I had just done the hardest thing I had ever done, and I was still upright, and that felt like something that deserved flowers. The next 72 hours were the kind that move in strange time, both very fast and very granular, so that you remember individual minutes but can't account for whole afternoons. Daniel came home at 11:15 that night. I was already in the bedroom with the door closed. I heard him downstairs, the sound of him sitting at the kitchen table, then the particular silence of a man alone with a stack of papers that have just restructured his world. He didn't come upstairs. I slept, eventually, the shallow rigid sleep of someone whose body has spent all its adrenaline and has nothing left but the obligation to rest. In the morning he was at the kitchen table when I came down. The envelope was open in front of him, the pages spread out, the asset summary face up. He looked like a man who had not slept at all, which he probably hadn't. He looked smaller than he usually looked in that kitchen. Slightly diminished, like something structural had been removed. I made coffee. I set a cup in front of him without being asked. I sat across the table. He said, "I don't know what to say to you." "You don't have to say anything," I told him. "The attorneys will talk." "Cassie." I looked at him. I want to be fair about what I saw in his face that morning, it wasn't nothing. There was something real there, something that might have been remorse or might have been grief or might simply have been the expression of a man who had gambled on never being caught and was now sitting across from the evidence that he had miscalculated on a scale he hadn't imagined. I don't know which one it was. Maybe all 3 at once. I didn't ask him to explain. I had never needed his explanation. The numbers explained everything that mattered. The rest was his to carry. I called my mother from the back porch at 9 that morning. She answered on the first ring. "How do you feel?" "Strange," I said. "Quiet." "That's the right answer." A pause. "Are you going to be okay?" I leaned against the porch railing and looked at the backyard, the oak tree, the garden beds I had planted 3 summers ago, the weathered table where we used to have coffee on Sunday mornings when things were different or when I believed they were. "Yes," I said. "I think I'm going to be more okay than I've been in a long time." She made a sound that wasn't quite a laugh and wasn't quite a sigh. Numbers don't lie, she said. The first lesson. Numbers don't lie, I agreed. By Thursday the phone had rung enough times that I stopped answering numbers I didn't recognize. Trish called twice. I let it go to voicemail. The messages were careful, measured, designed to give nothing away. She said she just wanted to check in, that she hoped I was doing okay, that if I needed anything. She did not say she was sorry. She did not say her brother was wrong. She said check in and if you need anything, and I respected the performance while understanding exactly what it was, a probe to assess how much damage had been done and whether there was still something to manage. I didn't call back. Roger called on Friday morning. His voice was different from Trish's, heavier, more direct, stripped of the careful diplomatic softness the rest of the family deployed by default. He said, Cassie, I owe you an apology. I sat down. You don't, I do. He was quiet for a moment. I knew Daniel had changed these past 2 years. I could see it. Diane saw it too. We told ourselves it was work pressure. A pause. We didn't ask hard enough questions because we didn't want to find hard answers. That's not an excuse. I'm just telling you the truth. I pressed my hand flat against my kitchen table. Roger, I said. You were kind to me for 8 years. You were the one person in that family who made me feel like I belonged. I'm not holding anything against you. His voice, when it came back, was rough at the edges. You're a better person than my son deserves. I didn't disagree with him. But I also didn't say anything else, because there are some truths that are better received in silence than confirmed aloud. By the end of the first week, Daniel had retained a lawyer named Hollis from a firm I recognized, high-end, aggressive, the kind of practice that specializes in dragging proceedings out long enough that the other side runs out of money or patience or both. Under normal circumstances that would have been a strategic move. With Renata and with the documentation I had provided, it was not. His lawyer reviewed our exhibits on a Thursday and reportedly called Daniel the same afternoon. Renata told me about the call with the particular dry satisfaction of someone who has spent 30 years being the most prepared person in any negotiation. She said Hollis had described the documentation as, and I am quoting, unusually thorough for a non-litigated case. I built financial fraud cases for 12 years, I told her. I know what documentation looks like when it doesn't have holes. She smiled. I could hear it through the phone. He's going to propose settlement. How quickly? 30 days. Maybe less. He can read a room. The room right now is not in Daniel's favor. She was right. It was 21 days. The settlement conference happened on a gray January morning in Renata's conference room, herself, me, Hollis, and Daniel, with a mediator named Patricia who wore reading glasses on a chain and had the demeanor of someone who had guided far messier rooms than this one to conclusions. Daniel sat across the table from me for the first time since the kitchen on that Thursday morning. He looked like a man who had been sleeping poorly and knew it showed. He didn't look at me directly for the first 20 minutes. The terms were settled in 4 hours. The hidden accounts returned in full, all $78,000. Plus interest on the brokerage at market rate, which brought the total to just under $84,500. The house was mine, its full equity calculated against our joint mortgage balance. My car. My professional archives. Full dissolution, no contest, no drawn-out custody battle over assets or narrative. In exchange, I agreed not to pursue the fraud allegation criminally. Renata had advised me that I had grounds, misappropriation of marital funds at the scale Daniel had operated was actionable, but that a criminal proceeding would take years and cost me more than it would recover. The settlement, clean and fast, gave me everything that actually mattered. Daniel signed at 2:47 in the afternoon. I watched his hand move across the page and I felt something I hadn't expected, not triumph, not satisfaction, not even relief, exactly. Something quieter than all of those. The particular settling that happens when a long piece of work is finally finished and the result holds. Renata walked me to the elevator afterward. She shook my hand in the way she shook hands, both of hers around mine, brief and firm. She said, "You did this right. Every step." "I learned from good teachers," I told her. She laughed. "Real this time, not the dry professional one. Go home, Cassie. You've earned it." I drove home in the January gray with the heat on high and my hand steady on the wheel, and somewhere on this stretch of highway before my exit I thought about Diane's speech at the dinner, her voice carrying that word into the candlelit room, offering it up like a gift she had spent 35 years curating. Honesty. I thought about the way she'd said it. Certain. Proud. The kind of woman who believed the values she named in public were the ones her family actually lived by. I wondered if she had spoken to Daniel about what was in those pages. Whether she had asked him directly, the way Roger had asked me directly. I wondered if she had heard his answers and whether the answers had done to her understanding of her son what the original text preview had done to mine, not destroyed it, but restructured it. Made its shape less clean. Made it something she would have to carry differently from now on. I didn't feel sorry for her. But I didn't feel glad either. I just felt the truth of it, that some reckonings don't only land on the person who earned them. They radiate outward. They settle on everyone who was in the room. The Alderton Club had been exactly the right room. Not because I had wanted witnesses. Not because I needed 60 people to confirm what I already knew. But because the story Daniel had been telling, to his family, to his colleagues, to himself, had always been told in rooms like that one. In rooms full of people who trusted the performance. And the only way to end a story told in public is to tell the true one in the same space, in front of the same audience, with the same quiet authority. My mother's second lesson. The one I had pressed into my spine that cold December night before I walked into the Alderton Club. Stay quiet. Take notes. Your moment will come. It came. I was ready. And now I was going home. The house felt different the first morning I woke up in it alone. Not smaller, I had expected smaller. It felt larger. Like rooms that had been quietly holding their breath for 2 years had finally exhaled. I made breakfast. I left the dishes in the sink because I felt like it. I opened the window despite the cold. Small things. Ridiculous things. The kind of things that only matter when you have spent years calibrating yourself against someone else's presence and have abruptly stopped needing to. My mother drove up from Harlow County that Saturday with a casserole and a bottle of wine she'd been saving. We opened it at noon. She looked at me across the kitchen table, the same table I had pressed my hands flat against in the dark of so many difficult mornings, and after a long silence she said simply, "You did good." "I learned from you," I told her. She shook her head. "You learned the tools from me. The courage was yours." I want to be honest about what the months after that actually felt like, because I think this is the part that gets left out of stories like mine. January was hard. February was harder in different ways. Not because I regretted anything. But I had spent 8 years building something I now understood had been, for the last 2.5 of them, a structure with a false wall in it. That grief was real. It deserved its space and I gave it that. My therapist, Dr. Elaine Marsh, said something in February I have thought about nearly every week since. She said, "You protected yourself with extraordinary skill. Now give yourself permission to also be the person who was hurt." Both things were true. The skill and the hurt. Letting them exist in the same room inside me, that was the work that came after the legal work. It was slower. It didn't have exhibits. But it was necessary, and I did it. By spring I had converted Daniel's study into a proper office. 2 monitors, a drafting table, a cabinet for physical files. My caseload doubled by April, doubled again by summer. I hired a part-time associate named Dana Reyes, sharp, meticulous, the kind of person who writes things down when you tell her something worth keeping. The practice became something I hadn't dared to fully imagine while I was still inside the marriage. It became mine, entirely and without apology. Roger called on my birthday in October. He didn't explain how he remembered. He asked, quietly, directly, the way Roger always asked things, whether I was actually okay. Not performing okay. Actually. I told him the truth. Most days, yes. Some days were still the work of getting through. But I was building something real and it was mine, and that made the difference. He said, "That's everything, Cassie. That's actually everything." 3 months after the settlement, I found the white roses in the back of the refrigerator, still upright in the vase where I'd left them that December night, dried now, faded from white to the pale cream of old linen. I held them for a long time. Then I put them on the windowsill of my new office, where they still are. People ask about them. I tell them they were a gift. That's true. They were the gift of knowing. And knowing was the thing that saved me. I think about what those 2 years cost and I want to name it clearly, because the story isn't fully honest without it. It cost me sleep. It cost me a marriage I had believed in. It cost me the future I had been quietly building in my imagination, the one with the oak table and the Sunday mornings and the life that looked a certain way from the outside. But here is what I know now, sitting where I sit, the 2 years were not wasted. They were the work. Every morning I chose not to react was a morning I was building instead. Every document filed, every account photographed, every quiet drive to Renata's office, that was the foundation. And the foundation held. In a room of 60 people. Without a single raised voice. My mother's 2 lessons. Numbers don't lie. And stay quiet, take notes, your moment will come. She was right about both. Patience is not passivity. The most powerful move is the one nobody sees coming. And the truth doesn't need an audience, but sometimes the audience needs the truth. December 14th. The Alderton Club. 60 people. 1 envelope. I knew the whole time. And I documented all of it. If you are the person who has been deceived, quietly moved around on someone else's board while they smiled at you across a candlelit table, hear this. You do not have to react in the moment to be powerful in the long run. You do not owe anyone the satisfaction of watching you break before you have finished building. Take the notes. Follow the numbers. Trust what you know. And when the room is right, walk in prepared, say the true thing quietly, and walk back out into the cold air. The roses are on my windowsill. The office is mine. The work continues. And I am, for the first time in longer than I can cleanly measure, entirely and documentably fine. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If you loved this story, check out the other videos on your screen now. I think you'll really enjoy them. And don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. See you in the next story.